Last month, I wrote an article for Filmmaker Magazine about the film emulation in the 2023 Alexander Payne motion picture, The Holdovers. There's a link in the description. So I figured, why not cannibalize my own writing before others get to it? If you're a working colorist or cinematographer, you're probably familiar with one question in particular. Maybe you've even asked it yourself. How do we get the film look? As other videos, books, and explainers have laid out in extensive detail, even us low-budget indies can pretty easily break it down these days to replicate the perceptual characteristics of film, assuming you've collected a good data set. The image you're looking at right now is, compression aside, intended to faithfully replicate an equivalent image as shot on 35mm Kodak Vision 2 500T film stock. Now, this might not look like what one might expect to see as, the film look. And that's because what has become known as the film look is really based off audience expectations. And those expectations tend to conform to a kind of a caricature of the film look. Something more like this, where we've used a lens that is 60 years old, slapped a bunch of softening filters on it, and put a bunch of post-processing on it to make it look really dirty. Modern film stocks, modern lenses, and digital intermediates have mostly been designed with finer grain and sharper images in mind. The average feature film shot on celluloid in the late 2000s and finished via digital intermediate does not quite match up with what has become popularly known as the film look. In the current era, dominated by digital workflows, the film look has become defined by a set of aesthetic impulses foregrounded in response to a common perception of the sterility of digital images. Phenomena once seen as drawbacks to be minimized, chromatic aberration, lens flares, and distortion, these have little to do with celluloid and its properties as a medium. However, they have nonetheless become central to audience perceptions as to what film looks like. For the Holdovers, however, this was just a starting point. Despite an entirely digital workflow, director Alexander Payne, cinematographer Eigil Bryld, and colorist Joe Gawler want us to believe we are watching a movie that was shot and exhibited on film that's been left in a garage for decades. A questionable release print of a movie shot in the winter of 1969 and 1970. They are emulating not just a look, but a creative process, and that's where things get interesting. There's the obvious stuff, like a nearly mono soundtrack that's been distorted and rolled off at around 8 kHz to resemble the Academy mono standard at the time.
Son of a bitch, that's another detention!
As well as period-appropriate title cards. But just as important are the tools they took off the table. Power windows, no Steadicams, no drones. And most of all, it means inhabiting ideologies that are no longer popular. Current trends in popular cinema lighting, dogmatic adherence to natural sourcing, and aversion to fill light, are mostly avoided. Instead, we've got hard frontal sources throughout the daylit interiors, and only loosely motivated sourcing during nighttime scenes. And this is what makes the Holdovers truly unusual in the current landscape of cinematic textures, where everyone is trying to emulate something. This has as much in common with Gareth Marenghi's Dark Place, or the series Documentary Now as anything else.
Oh, and here's one of the stars now, Puffin, the bird.
Each of these works asks the viewer to not only consider the diegetic quote-unquote reality common to all narrative fiction, but that of the implied crew making the fictional work we're viewing. In the case of Documentary Now, that means researching the specific personalities of individual camera operators. A key part of the success of that show's period format emulation lies in the meticulous attention paid to the differences in camera operation styles between people like D.A. Pennebaker and Albert Maysles. Likewise, in the Holdovers, when a jerky tripod movement occurs, or a focused mark is missed entirely, are we to take this as a mistake by the real crew that made this movie in 2022 and 2023, or a mistake by an imagined crew circa 1970? This meta-narrative play acting allows Payne and Bryld to regularly engage in, to use the parlance of our times, uncinematic gestures throughout the film. Elements that frequently appeared throughout the films of the late 1960s and early 1970s and have since been marginalized are evident throughout. Rough, halting pans and tilts.
Where's my photo?
What photo?
Reverberant and tinny dialogue scenes.
Sounds like courting disaster.
Yeah, that's the whole damn point. Sit down. Come on.
Unconventionally timed dissolves.
And we will have failed to do our jobs. Now, eat.
moments of proscenium-aware blocking,
I could have been spending the rest of my vacation reading mystery novels.
magenta, unsightly, traditionally, skin tones. In a more conventional and contemporary formal scheme, any one of these might immediately stick out as mistakes. Here, they're an expressive and unusual toolkit to play with. The act of looking back at old mediums and techniques to inform one's own work, as commonly practiced, often manifests as a conservative impulse. Let's not design something new, the old ways were better. The Holdovers is a worthwhile study in the ways in which this need not be the case. By focusing on passé and unfashionable working methods in the context of this intellectual exercise in period dress-up, Payne and company have managed to sneak an unusually concentrated set of aesthetic gestures which violate current ideas of the quote-unquote cinematic past audiences worldwide. Anyways, this video here is just a fairly gratuitous, shorter version of a much longer article we published in Filmmaker Magazine. So if you want to hear about all the ways in which everyone involved in this film, motion tracked, film stock to do stuff and stuff, go read that article. I think it's pretty good.